Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I've read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest, dynamic speaker covering faith and science, PhD psychiatrist or physicist, and practicing Christian with original insights about creation, evolution, and time, none other than Mr. Tom Sheahen.
Good evening. Welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Welcome, Mr. Tom. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Certainly, I'm a physicist, graduate of MIT, doctorate degree as well in physics, and a research career that spanned all kinds of energy sciences over many years. And I have also found that it's worthwhile to spend a considerable amount of time looking at the linkage between science and religious faith. I've devoted my time in the last 15 years primarily to that activity to try to bring these two together and to show other people too, to teach other people that there is no fight, there is no animosity, there is no antagonism, and that science and faith are both partners on a pathway towards better understanding of truth. Is that
Understanding the truth. I like that, Mr. Tom. And today let's talk about faith and science. Are they really opposed? And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So tell us, Mr. Tom, let's start by defining the terms. When we talk about faith in this context, are we referring to a specific set of religious doctrines or more a general trust in a
well?
transcendent reality?
Yeah, there are many things that all religions have in common, and in particular, the appreciation. I think the word that we seek for in our within our hearts is called numinous. That is, there is a something within each human being that says there's more, there's more, there's more. The world of space and time, the world of atoms and molecules, isn't all there is. We have this inner understanding, this appreciation, this appeal for higher things that exists within each person. And that is the realm of higher thinking, of higher level of being, the level of the spirit. And this is where we find faith comes into play. Now, there's a lot of people get the impression, oftentimes at the beginning of high school, that faith and science are opposed. Somebody tells them, if you want to be scientific, you've got to give up all that religious faith stuff. And people fall for that. They get convinced of it, and they go through a big fraction of their life thinking that faith and science are opposed. So that if they're religious, they think they have to keep it in separate compartments. I have people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're a scientist? Gee, you don't believe in God, do you?" I say, "Of course I do." And they're surprised by this. So the idea that's in a lot of people's mind that faith and science are opposed is a real problem, and one that I think we all have to work pretty hard to overcome.
So, Mr. Tom, the famous conflict thesis suggests that science and religion have always been at war. Historians of science largely reject this now. So, where this powerful narrative come from, and why does it persist so strongly in our culture?
Well, there were a couple of books written, one in 1874 and one in 1899, that were to the effect that science is at war with religion. And never was true then, isn't true now, never was. Over many more centuries, religion and science have been partners. In fact, it was the Christian faith in the Middle Ages that gave development, or gave the beginnings, the rise of science. This is where science came from. And the reason there is such a thing as science is because of the religious belief that the world was intelligible, comprehensible, and worth studying. And that's why people have, for now several centuries, studied the world, the nature, the universe, the stars, and so forth. So it was Christianity that was the beginning of science, and the people who wrote there's one guy. The 1874 book was by a guy named Draper. The 1899 book was by a guy named Andrew Dixon White. They created this narrative that was never true at all. And unfortunately, an awful lot of people bought it. And people on the religious side sometimes bought it, and they put up defenses which engaged in the warfare when they didn't need to. Because in reality, faith and science have been partners all along. And that is so important for everyone to understand. And I would speak particularly to students in high school, junior high, because that's when the line comes along that if you're going to be scientific, you've got to quit being religious. Isn't true in the slightest. And my book, Every When, God, Symmetry, and Time, tries to tell people not to be afraid and not to think that their science and their religion are going to be in conflict, because they aren't.
They are not conflict, people. So is the real conflict between faith and science, or it's more accurately between dogmatism and curiosity, whether that dogmatism is a religious or scientific?
Well, honestly, there's a certain amount of scientific dogmatism out there, which, of course, is on the other side of religious dogmatism. When you study the really brilliant philosophers over the ages, and certainly St. Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s has got to be at the top of that list, you find out that there are very good philosophical, intelligent reasons to believe in God. There have been more recent philosophers like Bernard Lonergan in the 20th century that showed even more comprehensive proof of why you should believe in God. And in the late 20th century up to now, my colleagues, physicists, have shown some very important things about the universe. For one thing, the universe had a beginning. It necessarily began at a point in time. It has not been going there on forever. And that makes a huge difference from the point of view of thinking about things like bouncing universes and universes from this, that, and the other thing, and so forth. There are a few physicists out there who have argued that the universe always existed, but they've basically been swept aside by the new understanding that has come along in the last 20 or 30 years. So we now understand that the universe began at a point in time. We call it the Big Bang. And that is something that is new in the last century. So the way that science points to the brilliance and the creative originality of this supreme being, God, who transcends our universe, but created it by brilliant stroke of genius, far beyond what we can comprehend. Our science now points to that, and it tells us how to look at it, how to understand it, how to appreciate it. And so as a result, where uh, 50, 60 years ago, probably half of scientists were atheists. Now, the number who are actually believing in God and practicing a religious faith is much higher, up like 67%, because the old point of view that science is superior and we don't need religion and so forth, that has basically gone away as people's understanding of the universe has gotten better and better. And as we see more and more that all the things in science, astronomy especially, points directly to our universe being created by an intelligent and transcendent God. And that's really a surprise to a lot of people over the last century. But it's right there in the all the physics that we've studied now for a century makes it very clear that God created it.
God created the world for sure. Many founding figures of a modern science like Kepler, Newton, and Mendel were deeply motivated by their religious faith, seeing their work as thinking gods thought after him. How did faith transition from being a primary motivator for scientific inquiry to being seen by many of its adversaries?
Well, it's hard to say. Um, let's see. 17th century Newton, the founder of classical mechanics, was very religious. 19th century Maxwell, who put together electromagnetism and gave us a coherent understanding of electricity and magnetism and electromagnetic waves and so forth. 1872, he was a religious man. Um, the Some of the astronomers, Secchi, a lot of these astronomers of the 18th and 17th century now have satellites named after them. The Galileo probe of the Jupiter and so forth, the Secchi satellite, etc. These space probes are named after famous astronomers, and every one of them was a religious man. The the lapse into a, the appearance of opposition came, I think, after Darwin's book. Darwin in 1859 published The Origin of Species. And there he showed um, mankind really did evolve over a long period of time from earlier species. And as we understand science now in physics, we see that evolution starting way back with the Big Bang and going into galaxies and stars and planets and all this. And it's all a continuous process. And the development on this particular planet of life, first vegetable life, then animal life, then improving uh, sentient animals, animals with memory and everything like that, and finally upward to mankind. That is a process which is honored by science and respected, and contemporary religious thinkers agree with it. But there was a time right after Darwin in the late 19th century when it seemed like this was a bombshell out of the left field that was clobbering religion. And for about 30 or 40 years, people really didn't know what to do. There was an impression among scientists in those days, based on classical mechanics, that the world is deterministic and that the way atoms and molecules move around is that everything is predestined and going to happen in a certain way just because of physics. And that was swept aside in the early 20th century by quantum mechanics and the uncertainty that is necessarily part of quantum mechanics. So these beliefs, though, that surrounded them, particularly um, beliefs that I will call anti-religious beliefs, grew up in the latter part of the 19th century after Darwin and really took hold pretty strongly in the early part of the 20th century. But as we've learned more in physics, chemistry, biology, and so forth, we've come to see that that was an oversimplification and was never really correct.
The Galileo affair is often cited as the quite essential example of religion suppressing science. Is that accurate reading of that historical event? And what are the nuances often missed in that story?
Okay, the Galileo fiasco was one of the all time great blunders. Um, it was a huge mistake on the part of the clergymen to have bought into a scientific theory from centuries before, and they forgot about the fact that you must never call a scientific theory final. But a lot of clergymen in important positions believed that the Ptolemaic system of the planets, other planets and stars, and the sun revolving around the Earth was the way things were. And these guys would not consider that scientific theory could possibly be corrected. Okay. Along comes Galileo with perfectly good evidence that no, we go around the sun. He invited people to look through his telescope at the moons of Jupiter and see how smaller planets go around bigger ones. And a lot of them were so fixed in their notion that they just refused to look through the telescope. So as a result, by about 1630, Galileo had kind of had it with these guys. He was pretty fed up. And so he got in, he wrote a book in which he explained how it all really exists. And he called the book The Dialogue on the Great World Systems. And he had a smart man named, I think, Sagredo, and an uninformed man named Simplicio. And it turns out that when the Pope read that book, he could see that it was a copy of the conversations he had had with Galileo, and he, the Pope, was cast in the role of Simplicio. So, well, understandably, that made him pretty mad. And so the Inquisition had it in for Galileo for like 15 years anyway. So the Pope turned them loose on Galileo, and they took him to all kinds of inquisitional type nastiness. But in the final analysis, the Pope realized that Galileo really was his friend and was a faithful religious Catholic person, and he would not condemn him. So instead, they just put Galileo into, told him to stay home, house arrest, for the last years of his life, which was a pretty easy gig because Galileo had already pretty much gone blind by staring at solar eclipses. And within 20 years later, everybody knew that Galileo's explanation based on going around the sun, the heliocentric model, was correct. So there then ensued several centuries of embarrassment for the Catholic Church. And they learned after that fiasco that they will never again try to say that such and such scientific theory is truth, because truth is there, but we only come to understand it gradually. And as we are pursuing science, any day, a scientific theory can always change. So the church had many mistakes like that again, but it sure was embarrassing for the time it took place. And a lot of people made a lot of fun of the church for that. And they paid a very high price in terms of membership, in terms of respect by other people, and so forth over the centuries after the Galileo fiasco. But so it was a very regrettable event, but we think we put it behind us now.
Galileo fiasco, indeed. And the theory of evolution is a major flashpoint. Can one hold a traditional religious view of a god as a creator while fully accepting the scientific evidence for evolution? What is the harmony look like?
Okay, your readers will find it in my book entitled Every When, God, Symmetry, and Time. Evolution is God's gift to mankind. That's his mechanism of creation. It's brilliant. The creativity, the originality of it is stunning. The things that God thought up in the beginning, the symmetry principles. Remember, my subtitle is God's Symmetry and Time. Those principles led to the laws of physics, and the laws of physics led to the physical creation of stars, galaxies, and so forth, elements, the planets, etc., etc. All of this was anticipated and foreseen by God in his brilliance and his transcendence. And the way in which you wind up looking at what we have today with the universe, with intelligent human beings here, I have come to the conclusion that the reason there is anything at all is because God wanted to create a creature who is capable of loving God in return. And that's why there is mankind. That's why there has been all those billions of years of evolution. And it's a brilliant testimony to the unbelievable originality, creativity, and brilliance of God. And honestly, when you appreciate where we are today, where evolution has brought us, you can only look back and say, my God, how great thou art, because it's evolution is the testimony to God's brilliance. And people who worry about the descent from apes and so forth, I'm sorry to say, are just kind of behind the time. They have not appreciated what an enormous gift by God the whole process of evolution has been. And the nice thing about it may be, looking towards the future, that God has now designated man as co creator. As we go forward, God and man working together can bring forth new creations, new inventions, new improvements that depend upon the brilliance of human beings, which is derived from the brilliance of God, but is part of the heritage that God has handed us by giving us evolution.
Giving us evolution for sure. And Mr. Tom, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry and second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, a comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well, geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast law 101 and mental health 101, love letters in third season, and movie 101 review, music 101 in fourth season, and science 101 and sex 101 in each first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Tom, if you could leave our audience or viewers with one key takeaway to transform this conversation from one of conflict to one of the constructive dialogue, what would it be?
The best book on faith and science I think ever written is by C.S. Lewis in Britain in the early 1940s. It's called Mere Christianity. And the assertions put forth by Lewis are just very sound, very reasonable, easy to read, and something everybody can understand. And that will start you on a pathway to understanding that God has made our universe and has made scripture that brings together the unity of faith and science.
The unity of, wow, faith and science. So one more, Mr. Tom, what is the biggest misconception that religious people tend to have about science, and what is the biggest misconception scientists tend to have about religious faith?
All right. In both cases, they doubt the expansiveness. They think there are limits of the other. Scientists have oftentimes tried to put God in a box, thinking that God is limited within time. No, God's the creator of time. Scientists have to pay attention to that important distinction. On the other hand, religious people have to understand that science is not their enemy, that science is their friend, that science has done wonderful things and will continue to do so, and that religious people should willingly embrace these things.
Indeed, Mr. Tom Sheahen. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy, your books, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Oh, the projects now, well, working towards maybe a second edition, a little more expansion. My first edition was easy to read, but I didn't cover certain topics I should have. So if I come back with a new edition of the book in a couple of years, it will have more expanded content.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Tom Sheehan, because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering books to come, more and more advocacy to come. So, Mr. Tom, thank you so much for your time.
And thank you for having me.
More to come, people. See you soon.